There's 4 caves in the wintertime that are primarily used by gray bats, and we count them every 2 years, and there'll be in excess of 1 million bats in those 4 caves.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing. You go in a cave and you'll count or see about 400,000 bats. We got one that exceeds 500,000. So it's pretty remarkable to go in some of these caves and see the mass of bats.
The award-winning Tennessee WildCast is on the air with the latest on hunting, fishing, boating, wildlife watching, and all things outdoors. Make welcome your host, drummer and outdoor expert novice, Jason Harmon.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this edition of Tennessee WildCast. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for watching and listening. We got a fun show for you today. We're kind of on the non-game side today. We're not talking about hunting and fishing, but we're going to talk about some cool creatures here in Tennessee. And we'll get to our guest in just a minute. Mr. Don King helping me co-host.
Yes, sir. Great to be here, Jason. Welcome back after your trip out of town and bringing home some more gold for the WildCast effort.
Hey, WildCast was a finalist in the GSM Con Government Social Media Conference Awards.
Stiff competition from what I hear out there.
We had some good competition, but we were one of the top 5 finalists. Didn't bring home the top prize, but we got a nice certificate suitable for framing.
All right. We'll hang it on our wall of fame.
Yeah, it's at least the top 5. That's always good. But yes, and we couldn't do that or be as successfil without our radio partners.
Exactly. WJJM in Lewisburg. We call them our flagship for the WildCast Extra. The spark of the idea for the extras came from them, and Jeff Hazlip there at WJJM and Power 94 in Lewisburg. And they're on AM 1490, 94.3 FM, and 92.5 FM as well. And we are on there with WildCast, the full show, Saturdays at 8 in the morning. And the extras play twice a day at 7:40 a.m. and 4:40 p.m. drive time, prime time. So we appreciate WJJM. It's great to be on their air and all our other radio partners as well.
Yeah, our list is growing, and if you are listening to the show and want to have us on your network, give us a call.
Yeah.
Look us up, tnwildcast.com for the list of radio stations. It's there and all the information about this show. One thing I want to hit on before we get started is don't forget about our e-store. The hat that I'm wearing today, so if you're watching, you can see it. It's one of the newest additions to our e-store, shop.gooutdoorstennessee.com. It's got the new TriStar logo that we've created.
That's nice. I like that.
With some wildlife on it.
Instead of stars, it's got wildlife in the 3 spots. So that's cool.
So check that out. Go to our e-store. And then also gooutdoorstennessee.com to buy your license. So we always encourage you to do that. Help support wildlife. Every dollar you spend goes to conservation. So.
That's right.
All right, well, we'll jump into our guest here. Mr. Josh Campbell is with us, Chief of Biodiversity, and Mallory Tate, a Wildlife Survey Manager here for the agency. So we're glad you guys are here.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Looking forward to it.
We're going to talk all kinds of fun stuff today, non-game animals. But first, I wanted to jump in a little bit about you guys and tell us about who you are, what you do for the agency, kind of a little bit of your background and schooling and some of that stuff. So we'll start with Josh.
Okay. So I'm Josh Campbell. I just recently took over as Chief of Biodiversity. I've been with the agency almost 20 years. Started out, I got my degree in wildlife fishery science at UT.
Go Vols.
Absolutely. And then shortly after I got hired on with the agency, I actually pursued and got my master's at MTSU.
Hey, go Raiders.
Yeah, and my first job with the agency, I stocked trout. So I was a long haul guy that stocked from South Holston all the way down to Hiawassee. So spent about 2.5 years, and then I made the jump from stocking trout to doing survey work for the Biodiversity Division. So.
Awesome. Well, you've done a great job. We've worked together quite a bit outside of WildCast and appreciate everything you do.
Yes, I enjoy this job. I've loved biodiversity ever since I got into it. So it's been something different every day.
Cool.
During Josh's school days, he got to run on the field too, from what I understand, right?
Oh, yeah?
Once or twice. Yeah. So I was a member of the football team from 95 through 98. So
that's awesome.
So I kind of refer to it as the good years. Hopefully, Heupel's going to restore those back. So I was a part of some good football teams while I was there.
So part of the national championship team?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah, both the SEC championships and the national championship as well.
Wow.
Congrats on that. Yeah,
that was
that's
a good
great.
year. Yeah. I remember sitting in the stands for those games. That was a fun year.
Yeah. It's fun 3 years. So
Yeah.
all those runs.
Yeah. Awesome. All right. Well, Miss Mallory Tate, Wildlife Survey Manager, tell us about yourself. You're fairly new to TWRA.
Yeah, fairly new. I was hired on 2 years ago in Biodiversity, but I've been volunteering for about 5 years before I was hired on. So got some experience with the agency and non-game and game, and so I've been around a little while.
Awesome. So what do you do as a Wildlife Survey Manager?
So
What's that
my
look
job is to survey and monitor and do research projects on the species of greatest conservation need here in Tennessee. So for the most part, that's species that are in decline. Some of the species, it's just that they're so elusive, we're not sure where their population stands. So my job is to answer some of those questions.
Awesome. That's very important. Very important role. So today we are going to cover, we got a list of things. Bats is the first thing on our list. So that's something you've been working on quite a bit, Mallory, with doing some surveys and things like that. So tell us about that project and what that looks like, and we may have additional questions.
Yeah, okay. So bats can't really be encompassed in just one project. They're one of those species that we're kind of looking at year-round, probably because there's so little known about bats before the introduction of white nose syndrome to the United States. So in the winter, we're getting kind of total population counts while they're hibernating, because that's when most of the bats are in one space, which is caves. During the spring, we're looking at spring migration, so the bats leave their hibernation areas and then move to their summer maternity roosts. But in the spring, they're especially vulnerable because they're dehydrated coming out of hibernation. They've been foraging a lot less, so they're weaker and their immune systems are weaker. Even just their weight is about half, we're looking at, for certain species, than it is during the summertime. So they're making these huge journeys, like 400 miles to maternity colonies, the females are, at their weakest point, which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
And then following them to their summer maternity colonies, figuring out where they're having their pups, where they're raising them, and then in the fall, again, that migration route, looking at it, and then looking at some of their behavior to figure out how they're foraging and preparing for that winter hibernation, which is also when the disease impacts them. So it's kind of full circle for bats. They consume quite a bit of our time, especially right now, because populations are declining so rapidly.
Well, you mentioned white nose syndrome. Is that something that we're still concerned about? I know it popped up back 2006 or 7-ish. We started seeing it. Is that still a big focus?
It is. Because actually here recently another bat has been upgraded from threatened to endangered because of white nose syndrome.
Okay.
Probably expect 2 more species within the next 2 years to be added to the federal list due to white nose syndrome. So you are right. It was found in the U.S. in 2006, 2007. We found it here in Tennessee in 2010.
Okay.
And since then it pretty much went statewide, or at least the counties that contain caves in 2 years. So it made a pretty quick spread throughout the state, and it affects most of the bats that utilize the caves during the wintertime. So and we've seen some large declines for some species throughout the state.
And Mallory, I know that's really complicated your surveys, hasn't it? I mean, keeping the protocols of not transmitting or spreading it, beyond where it is already.
Yes. Yeah, a good portion of my time is spent on decontamination.
Right.
My fiance actually complains about how the house always smells like rubbing alcohol or bleach. So, yeah. So,
oh, man.
A lot of time spent making sure that we're not carrying that fungus in places where we picked it up and spreading it elsewhere.
Right.
Well, can it hurt humans? Have it seen to?
No, as of right now, it's really just in bats or
Okay.
affecting bats. Other animals and humans can obviously carry the fungal spores.
Right.
But we cannot get white nose syndrome.
Right.
No.
So that's why all the precautions to, not to move it around and
Yes.
use all the bleach. And I've heard it's pretty, when you go into these caves and things, do these surveys, it's a lot of work to decontaminate yourself and get into some different clothes and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of bit of time to plan too, because you want to plan your equipment that you take in the caves and make sure you have what's necessary to conduct that survey, but you also want to minimize the amount of equipment, so you lessen your time with decon, but then you don't ruin certain pieces of equipment like cameras and things like that don't do too good with alcohol poured on them or
Yeah.
bleach and things like that.
Yeah,
So
right.
it does take quite a bit of time to plan decon. So.
Can you kind of give us a quick overview of what a survey looks like? What are you doing when you go into a cave? If you can't share, that's fine. But what's some of the things that you do when you go into a cave? You're rappelling in some cases. You're
Yeah.
crawling. What are you doing?
It's going to vary. So it's going to vary by the site,
Okay.
and depends on the size of the cave. What's needed. Like you said, some caves require rappelling. I'm not big on ropes or ladders, so I leave those to the other people. We do have staff that, like Mallory, is certified or trained in ropes and rappelling, because there's over 10,000 caves in the state. So some of them, they're not all walk-in. Some require the ropes. It also depends on the species we expect to see in those caves. Because if we're going to go in and do gray bats, we expect to see tens of thousands. So that changes how we count the bats. Some sites there's many species, but we expect to see fewer, so we count all the individuals. Because with gray bats, we got to be in and out pretty quick. Because us being in those caves actually arouses the bats during the wintertime, so we want to be as less disturbing to those bats as possible. The other species we can go in and count pretty quick. So, but gray bats, it's pretty remarkable, and they're a species that's endangered. Their recovery efforts and they're recovering very well. There's 4 caves in the wintertime that are primarily used by gray bats, and we count them every 2 years. And there'll be in excess of 1 million bats in those 4 caves.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing. You go in a cave and you'll count or see about 400,000 bats. We got one that exceeds 500,000. So it's pretty remarkable to go in some of these caves and see the mass of bats. So just to kind of give you a perspective, Bracken Cave in Texas has the largest colony of free-tail bats in the world, and there's in excess around July about 20 million bats in Bracken Cave. So,
Man.
yeah. So you can get high numbers pretty quick depending on the species.
That's crazy. I couldn't imagine. Well, going into these caves, is it kind of eerie, kind of spooky going into these caves? These bats flying around you, or could be flying around, or do they get spooked at some point and just ever flown around you? And
Yeah. I mean, but it's part of the job.
but they're not. Yeah.
I'd say less spooky and more kind of like awe-inspiring. This
Yeah,
was the
yeah.
first year I got to do the gray bat count with TWRA. That one, the agencies limit numbers because the bats do arouse pretty easily.
Sure.
So as few people as possible to get the job done. So this was the first year I got to do that, and I was covered in chills before and after. So it was really cool.
Yeah, because sometimes you can get in there and the bats are like you're this close to the bats; they're just inches away from you.
Yeah.
But then you go on other sites and the bats are hundreds of feet away, and you're trying to count. So you can get pretty close, but they're generally sleeping. But our body heats and things like that changes the temperature, so they arouse. Some sites the temperature's a little bit warmer, so just our presence will have more of an impact, and so they'll start arousing. So we've really got to move pretty quick.
Quick in, quick out then.
Yep. So
And that count part, is it a visual only, or how does that work?
Well, here in Tennessee, it's an area estimate, so we try to determine how many bats per square foot. And somebody at some point in time actually took a square foot and counted the bats within that square foot, so we get a rough idea of what that estimate is. But then other states, they actually use cameras to try to put dots on noses and things like that. So
And obviously you need some light source when you're in there to at least momentarily, or for how long do you leave a light on to
As
access the count?
as seconds,
Okay.
hopefully, just so that you can kind of get your measurement,
Gotcha.
length and width length and width, whatever. And then you move on because we're trying to decrease the disturbance. And if for one reason or another we do have cameras with us, it's minimal shots and then again move on.
And I guess that keeping the disturbance to a minimum is the key for, especially for white nose syndrome, isn't it? Because that's the deal. They wake up when they're not supposed to, and they go out in elements that they're not supposed to be in, and that's what takes their lives, I guess.
Yeah, and I think on some levels, though, white nose has allowed us to learn a little bit more because we thought they probably didn't forage in Tennessee. And through the research that, like Mallory was doing when she was at UT and others, they actually forage more than what we thought.
Okay.
Depending on the species.
Yeah, depending on the species. And so we have learned that. And but the big thing, like with gray bats, the reason why they were listed is because the repeated disturbance over time was really leading to loss of animals in those sites and things like that. So.
Especially for gray, so they were listed before white nose syndrome, and gray bats are the one species in Tennessee that do require caves year round. So, like I talked about life cycles earlier, they're having all of their life cycles disrupted by caving recreationally.
Right.
So, not only while they're kind of weakened and supposed to be saving energy while they're in torpor during the wintertime, but while they're having pups, people are going into these caves because we've got beautiful caves here in Tennessee, but it disrupts the mothers, and they can drop pups, and the pups land on the floor and, become scraps for a raccoon. So it's kind of that continued disruption that's really impacted the gray bats.
So what kind of regulations are there out there for going into some of these caves? I know some of them are protected and are blocked in some cases, but I guess there's still some open that people can get into.
Well, yeah. So caves on private lands are based on the ownership and the property owners, whether they allow or don't allow you to enter the caves. Some state agencies, like TWRA, have a permitting system for some of their caves. And then, of course, there are a number of caves in the state that are gated and require additional permission and keyed access. And then caves on TWRA lands are closed year-round, unless you have a scientific collection permit or permission from the agency to enter for a valid reason. So,
okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, because several of the species that are in decline actually utilize the caves year-round, even though, like in the summertime, you would expect northern long-eared bats and tricolor bats to be on the landscape, but they do utilize those caves in the wintertime. And so there is, because the temperature in the caves, there is sort of a induced hibernation, even though it's not as long as it would be in the wintertime. So we really want our caves to act like a refuge for those bats in the summertime to minimize and eliminate as much disturbance as possible.
Yeah.
So.
Hey, speaking of refuges, what about the man-made cave that, I hadn't heard anything about it lately, but I know you were heavily involved with that.
Yeah, so we partnered shortly after white nose hit the state. We partnered with TNC because we're trying to figure out different ways to implement research and maybe biocontrols and things like that are created as a part of the ongoing research. And you can't take something that's created in a lab, like a form of biocontrol that's not FDA and EPA approved, and just take it and put it into the wild. You got to put it in a controlled situation, controlled environment. So, and then the other thought was having a cave that you could actually decontaminate itself, because over time, as white nose enters the system, the fungal loads increase within that system, and so as the fungal loads increase, your bat, the number of bats that become effective also increase.
Sure.
So if we could go in there and decon the cave, maybe we can hold those white nose levels at the year one rates. And so TNC developed a project, and we built it literally right next door to Bellamy Cave, on Bellamy Cave Refuge up just outside of Clarksville. And it's basically box culverts stacked beside each other, and mimics a cave. We've really never gotten a large number of gray bats. We're hoping that some would come from Bellamy and enter this artificial site, and then we could kind of test a lot of different hypotheses with the white nose. But it was either microclimate things with temperature and moisture that just never did get right, and so we've not had a large number of bats utilize the cave. But we're actually trying to utilize it for for other forms of white-nose research, but of course there's money and funding and things like that
Sure.
that we haven't been able to secure yet for that. So,
All right.
Well, speaking of artificial, didn't you do a project in Wilson County or other counties where you're putting up fake trees?
Yes.
And have to tell us about that project.
yeah, so that's pretty much a culmination of a larger project where we're trying to find maternity colonies on TWRA lands for the endangered Indiana bat.
Okay.
For us to do a lot of work on our lands, we have to go in and assess the impacts to endangered species. And so if we're cutting timber, that could potentially impact Indiana bats. And so we wanted to find if there was any Indiana bats on our lands and learn from that. And so we started putting transmitters on these bats. And like Mallory said, they fly a long ways. But we tried to use caves in the proximity of one particular WMA and turned them all loose, and they all left the state. And so every year we change caves and put more and more transmitters out, only to find out they leave the state. So after about, I guess it was year 4, put about 20 or so, probably more than that, transmitters on bats from a cave over in White County, and the bats just went everywhere. So we tracked them, and the plane, because we use airplanes to track the animals, because we can't keep up with them with our vehicles. They fly fast enough, and of course there's not always a road underneath that bat.
Right.
And so the plane was flying over Senator Lake to refuel and heard a beep, and he was like, "Hey, there's beeps up here." So we're like, "Okay," so we went and checked it out, and we found a maternity colony in Wilson County, and we ended up finding 4 or 5 different maternity colonies up there that first year. But we've tracked bats to Kentucky, Indiana, Missouri, Mississippi, Georgia, and Alabama. And so we've kind of changed the biology and what we know about the species just from that project that's been initiated here in Tennessee, because it really created some issues for some other agencies outside of the state, because they didn't know they had Indiana bats, and hey, you do.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so we've learned a lot with that. But we ended up working with the landowner for one of the farms where we ended up having Indiana bats show up, and they showed up every year. That was the neat thing about it, was every time we implemented this project, they would show up at this farm. We'd do a drive-by, yeah, they're there. And but some of the trees that they were using started falling down, because the trees they use in the summertime are ephemeral. So they're only good for about 1 or 2 years, because they like a dead tree, preferably where the bark is popped, and it creates a void where the females can get under and raise their pups. And so those trees were falling down. So we were like, well, maybe we can work with the landowners, lease the property, and put some artificial bark up. And so we ended up getting some funding, and we're able to lease one particular farm. And 2 years ago, we actually put up our first set of artificial bark, which is really just kind of a plastic or a polymer that mimics real tree bark, and it creates that void, and put it up on telephone poles. And within about 6 months, we had our first maternity colony.
Oh, good.
Awesome.
And then additional efforts, we've identified another farm, and I guess, last week?
Last week,
Hey,
yeah.
this
Put up some
breaking
more.
news on WildCast.
Right.
Put some more Brandon bark up. It's the artificial bark. And so, and that's a farm we identified additional maternity colonies on through telemetry. So, but that project we started originally back in 2009. So it's taken some time, but it's come full circle. So we're putting on the ground conservation actions in place for an endangered species.
And it's really nice to see the bats finding these artificial roosts so quickly. And actually, the first farm, we've had them use roosts there 2 years. So
Yeah.
it wasn't just 1 year and then they're like, this isn't for me.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, there's a lot of fidelity with bats in their winter sites and their summer sites. So once they find that and that gets established, they keep coming back. And with Indiana bats, it's a little more tricky because the ephemeral nature of those maternity roosts. So, but they keep coming back. There's something there they like, and so we want to try to maintain that over time.
Good for the landowner, too, who's willing to
Yes.
work with us on situations like that. That's
Absolutely,
great.
and he's enjoyed it. So
Oh,
took a little
yeah.
more convincing of his wife, but he enjoyed it. So and they've been great partners and assets to the project.
Good.
Yeah, there's a huge benefit having bats around your area, and maybe you could speak on some of that. But I mean, I think it's cool, and they're there already. You may not know it, but they're there already. Just to give them that extra habitat and the extra spot and safe zone to do that, or places to do that, it's awesome.
Yeah, so all the bats here in Tennessee are insectivores, so they eat nothing but insects. We don't have any vampire bats. So all ours
Are you sure? No.
Yeah. So that's one of the common questions we get, especially when we go to school groups. But yeah, so everything is insectivores. So they're the number one nighttime predator of flying insects. They save a lot of money for the agriculture industry because they eat a lot of agricultural pests. And we're talking billions annually across the country that they save farmers just for pesticides that they don't have to put out. So it's pretty amazing what they do. Now, they don't eat quite as many mosquitoes as one might think because it takes a lot of little bitty mosquitoes to fill up a bat.
belly.
Yeah, so they'll eat beetles and flies and things like that. So, but they'll eat the occasional mosquito, but they wouldn't be necessarily the best form of mosquito control, but they do save a lot of money for the agriculture industry each year.
Would you encourage folks to put up bat boxes or bat colony home or little homes or whatever around your gardens and things to help?
Yeah, any type of habitat that you can provide for bats, we're definitely in favor of. I think with some of the research we're finding out, I think it would be best to hang multiple bat boxes with different microclimates. So not necessarily all full sun all the time, but maybe get a little bit less full sun just so they can move around and adjust with the temperatures. Because there's some issues with some pup mortality and bats getting overheated in bat boxes. So if you put one out, I would recommend you put 2 or 3, and
let them choose, right?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
and they can move as those temperatures change throughout the day. They can move when they change roost. But the other thing too is to be patient. If you hang a bat box up today, that doesn't mean you have bats tomorrow.
Right.
Or even the summer.
Yes, it could take 3 to 5 years before you get a colony, if ever, established in a bat box. So it does take some time because when you put that bat box up, you're competing with all the other habitat around your bat box.
Sure.
So that's either got to become unavailable or lost before they find yours. So we definitely recommend that when people get bats in their houses and things like that to kind of help offset that when they do the exclusion. But yeah, multiple bat boxes would be great.
Is there a key to knowing if you have bats on your property, things to look for, or get out at night and watch them fly?
I would recommend just get out at night, right when the sun's starting to set, and spend about 20, 30 minutes out there watching.
Just kind of sitting still?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Absolutely.
That's cool. I'm going to have to do that.
Yeah.
Get out and watch them.
It is fun, right at dusk especially. You see a lot of activity around our place.
Well, before we run out of time, this went fast, by the way.
We didn't even get to the other side.
I know.
That'd be next time.
Next time. Mallory, I enjoyed watching some of your Instagram posts when you were in school and so you were really active with bats then too,
Yes.
right? Doing a lot of studies in college.
I actually got my master's researching Indiana bats and then the tricolored bat, which is also in decline and expected to be listed here soon.
We always count on Mallory to tag us in those posts, and I got to see them, so that was good.
Good for you for all the hands-on experience and the volunteering up front.
Thank you.
That really makes a difference with working for us full time. It really does.
Yeah, thank you.
Congratulations on the recent hire and the promotion.
Thank you. Yes, promotion.
Yeah, and Josh just recently promoted to chief, so that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
All right, Don. Well, that's going to wrap it up.
I guess so.
Thank y'all for tuning in, for watching, for listening. This is Tennessee WildCast, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for tuning in. Stay connected with TWRA by visiting our website at tnwildlife.org and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Hey, it's all about Tennessee wildlife. It's what we do. Tennessee WildCast will be on the air again next week. We'll see you then.